The Etherian Empire was the oldest civilization in the galaxy. For 10,000 years, they had studied the universe. Their libraries contained all knowledge. Their scientists were revered across 1,000 worlds. Other species came to them to learn, to understand, to be enlightened. The Etherians believed they had reached the peak of understanding. They had mapped every star, catalogued every species, explained every physical law. There was nothing left to discover, nothing left to question, nothing left to learn. They were the masters. Everyone else was a student. Then humans arrived. They were young, curious, primitive by Etherian standards. Their ships were simple. Their technology was basic. Their understanding of the universe was like that of children. But they asked questions constantly. Why is the sky blue? How do stars form? What is gravity? They wanted to know everything. The Etherians were amused. They graciously agreed to teach the humans. They shared their knowledge, their science, their wisdom. The humans were grateful students. It was exactly as it should be. The Etherians assumed the humans would spend centuries catching up to their level of understanding. They were patient. They had time. Human students sat in Etherian classrooms, learning physics and chemistry and biology. They took notes. They asked questions. Normal student behavior. Among them was a young girl named Lena. She was small, quiet, but her eyes were always bright with curiosity. She listened carefully to every lesson. She took detailed notes. She asked thoughtful questions. Her teachers found her delightful. One day, the lesson was about gravity. The Etherian teacher explained it with practiced ease. Gravity is a fundamental force. It bends space and time. It keeps planets in orbit and stars in place. It is one of the basic laws of the universe. The students nodded, taking notes. Lena raised her hand. Yes, Lena. You say gravity bends space, she said. But what bends gravity? What tells it where to bend? The teacher blinked. What? Gravity bends space. That's what you said. But something must tell it how to bend. Something must give it orders. What is that something? The teacher stared at her. No one had ever asked this question. In 10,000 years of scientific study, no Etherian had ever thought to ask what caused gravity. They accepted it as a given. A fundamental force. Something that simply existed. But Lena wanted to know why. The teacher opened his mouth to answer. Closed it. Opened it again. Nothing came out. The classroom was silent. Other students looked at each other, confused. They had never seen a teacher at a loss for words. Lena waited patiently, her eyes still bright with curiosity. Finally, the teacher spoke. I do not know, he admitted. No one has ever asked that question. No one has ever thought to ask it. The silence deepened. In that moment, 10,000 years of certainty cracked. If they did not know what caused gravity, what else did they not know? What other fundamental assumptions might be wrong? Lena's simple question had opened a door no one knew existed. And the greatest scientific minds in the galaxy had no answer. News of the question spread. Scientists gathered to discuss it. Debates raged. Theories were proposed and dismissed. For the first time in millennia, the Etherians faced something they could not explain. And it all started with a human child who asked why. The classroom remained silent after Lena's question. The teacher, a learned Etherian named Scholar Vaughn, stood frozen at the front of the room. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Finally, he found his voice. That is not how science works, he said slowly. Gravity is a fundamental force. It does not have a cause. It simply exists. Lena frowned, her young face showing genuine confusion. But everything has a cause, she insisted. The wind blows because of temperature differences. Rain falls because of condensation. If gravity bends space, something must tell it how to bend. Something must give it orders. Vaughn had no answer. In 10,000 years of Etherian science, no one had ever asked this question. They had accepted gravity as a given. A fundamental force. Something that simply was. They had never asked why. Perhaps, Vaughn said carefully, some things are beyond understanding. Some things simply are. Lena shook her head. My mother says everything can be understood. You just have to ask the right questions. Word of the question spread through the scientific community. At first, it was a curiosity. A human child asking a naive question. Nothing to be concerned about. But the question would not go away. Scientists discussed it in their meetings. Philosophers debated it in their journals. The greatest minds in the Etherian Empire turned their attention to Lena's simple query. What causes gravity? Some Etherians were intrigued. Perhaps she is right, they said. Perhaps we have been too comfortable in our knowledge. Perhaps there is more to learn. Others were offended. How dare a primitive human suggest our knowledge is incomplete, they demanded. We have studied for 10,000 years. We have unlocked every secret. There is nothing left to discover. The debate grew heated. Days passed. Weeks. Months. The question would not go away. Scientists who tried to answer it found themselves facing more questions. If gravity had a cause, what was it? And if that cause had a cause, what was that? How far could you go? The foundation of Etherian science, built over millennia, began to crack. And at the center of it all was a human child who had simply asked why. Lena, meanwhile, continued her studies. She did not understand why her question had caused such controversy. To her, it was simple. Everything has a cause. Why should gravity be different? She asked more questions. About light. About time. About matter. Each question exposed another gap. Another assumption. Another thing the Etherians had never thought to question. The humans, it seemed, were very good at asking why. And the Etherians were learning that 10,000 years of knowledge was not as complete as they had believed. Among the Etherian scientists, one became obsessed with Lena's question. His name was Varen. He was young, by Etherian standards, only 2,000 years old. He had always been curious, always questioned things. But he had never questioned the foundations. Now he could think of nothing else. He abandoned his previous research, letting years of work gather dust. He spent every waking hour thinking about gravity. What caused it? How did it work? Why had no one ever asked? His colleagues warned him. You are wasting your time. Gravity is fundamental. There is nothing to discover. Varen ignored them. As he investigated, he found more gaps. Questions no one had thought to ask. Assumptions no one had questioned. The beautiful edifice of Etherian science, built over 10,000 years, began to show cracks. If gravity had a cause, what else had they misunderstood? What other fundamental truths might be illusions? The more he looked, the more he found. The scientific establishment pushed back. They did not want their knowledge questioned. They did not want their certainty disturbed. For 10,000 years, they had been the masters of understanding. Now a young scientist and a human child were suggesting they might be wrong. This is dangerous, the elders said. It leads to doubt, uncertainty, chaos. Varen argued with them. It leads to truth. Isn't that what science is supposed to seek? Some listened. Most did not. Varen reached out to Lena. She was still a student, still asking questions, still annoying her teachers with her persistence. When Varen contacted her, she was surprised but eager. You want to work with me? She asked. I'm just a human. I don't know anything. Varen shook his head. You know how to ask questions. That is more important than any knowledge. They began to work together. Lena brought fresh perspective. She did not know what was supposed to be impossible. She did not accept assumptions. She simply asked why and how and what if. Varen brought deep knowledge. He understood the mathematics, the physics, the history of Etherian science. He could test Lena's questions, explore their implications. Together, they were unstoppable. Months passed. They worked day and night, following leads, testing theories, chasing possibilities. Then came the breakthrough. It happened late one night, in Varen's laboratory. Lena had asked another of her simple questions. Varen had run the calculations. And suddenly, everything clicked. Gravity was not fundamental. It was a symptom. A side effect of something deeper. Something the Etherians had never imagined. They stared at the results, unable to believe what they were seeing. If gravity is not fundamental, Lena whispered, what else isn't? Varen shook his head slowly. I don't know. But I know one thing. He looked at her with wonder. Everything we thought we knew, it's just the beginning. The implications were staggering. If gravity was not fundamental, then the entire foundation of Etherian science was built on assumptions, not truth. 10,000 years of knowledge was not wrong, but it was incomplete. Painfully, dangerously incomplete. And it had taken a human child to show them. The day of the presentation arrived. Varen and Lena stood before the Etherian Science Council, the most prestigious gathering of minds in the galaxy. The room was packed. Every seat filled. Every eye watching. Varen's hands trembled slightly, but he stood tall. Lena, young and small among these ancient beings, showed no fear. Her eyes were bright with the excitement of discovery. The head of the council, an ancient Etherian named Zorath, nodded for them to begin. Varen presented their findings. He explained their research, their methods, their conclusions. He showed the math, the evidence, the proof. His voice was steady, clear, confident. The room listened in silence. When he finished, the silence continued. No one spoke. No one moved. The weight of what they had heard pressed down on everyone. Then the reactions began. Shock. Disbelief. Anger. Denial. Some scientists stood and shouted. Impossible. Our science is perfect. You cannot overturn 10,000 years of knowledge with a child's question. Others sat frozen, unable to process what they had heard. A few looked intrigued, their minds already racing with possibilities. And some looked terrified. If gravity was not fundamental, what else wasn't? What other certainties were about to crumble? Zorath rose slowly. He was the oldest being in the room, perhaps the oldest in the galaxy. He had seen empires rise and fall. He had watched 10,000 years of scientific progress. Now he looked at a human child and a young scientist who had turned everything upside down. You are telling us, he said, his voice heavy, that 10,000 years of science is wrong. The room held its breath. Lena stepped forward. She was small, young, utterly unremarkable in appearance. But her voice was clear and steady. Not wrong, she said. Incomplete. She looked around at the greatest minds in the galaxy. You built a beautiful house. The most beautiful house ever built. But you never checked the foundation. You assumed it was solid because the house stood. She gestured at their findings. We are showing you the foundation. It is not what you thought. But that does not make your house less beautiful. It just means you can build higher now. Zorath stared at her. For a long moment, no one spoke. The weight of her words hung in the air. Then Zorath looked at the evidence. The math. The proof. It was undeniable. He sat down slowly, his ancient face showing something no one had ever seen there before. Humility. The council debated for hours. Days. Weeks. Some refused to accept it. Others embraced it eagerly. Most fell somewhere in between, struggling to adjust to a new reality. But slowly, grudgingly, the truth was accepted. Their knowledge was not wrong. But it was limited. Terribly, dangerously limited. And a human child had shown them the limits. Lena watched the debates with quiet satisfaction. She had not set out to revolutionize science. She had only asked a question. A simple question. The kind of question any child might ask. But that question had cracked open 10,000 years of certainty. And the galaxy would never be the same. Varen stood beside her, looking at the chaos they had created. What now? He asked. Lena smiled. Now we ask more questions. Etherian science was reborn. The old certainties crumbled. New questions emerged. New discoveries followed. The greatest scientific revolution in 10,000 years swept through the galaxy. Laboratories that had been silent for centuries buzzed with activity. Scientists who had grown complacent now raced to explore new frontiers. Journals filled with debates, theories, breakthroughs. And at the center of it all was a simple truth. Knowledge was not a destination. It was a journey. A never-ending journey. Humans and Etherians worked together as never before. The humans brought fresh perspectives, endless curiosity, the willingness to ask why about everything. The Etherians brought deep knowledge, rigorous methodology, 10,000 years of wisdom. They learned from each other, challenged each other, grew together. New discoveries came faster than anyone could have imagined. Questions led to answers, which led to more questions, which led to deeper understanding. The universe, it turned out, was far more wonderful than anyone had ever dreamed. Lena grew up. She became a scientist, then a great scientist, then one of the greatest scientists in galactic history. Her name was spoken with respect on 1,000 worlds. But she never forgot where it started. In a classroom. With a simple question. With a teacher who had no answer. She made sure every student she taught understood the power of asking why. She encouraged them to question everything, to never accept easy answers, to always dig deeper. Years passed. Decades. Centuries. Lena grew old. Her hair turned white. Her steps slowed. But her eyes remained bright with curiosity. One day, a young Etherian student came to visit her. She was studying physics and had encountered something she did not understand. "Scholar Lena," she asked, "can you help me with this? I don't understand why." She trailed off, embarrassed. Lena smiled. That familiar, warm smile. "That is a good question," she said. "Let me tell you a story." The student sat down, eager to listen. "When I was your age, I sat in an Ethereum classroom. The teacher was explaining gravity. He said it was a fundamental force. It simply existed." The student nodded, familiar with the concept. I raised my hand and asked a question. If gravity bends space, what bends gravity? What tells it where to bend? The student's eyes widened. The teacher had no answer. No one had ever asked that question before. It cracked open 10,000 years of certainty. Lena leaned forward. That question changed everything. It started a revolution. It showed us that knowledge is never complete, that there is always more to learn. The student listened, fascinated. "What was the question?" she asked. "The exact words." Lena smiled. "The question was why. Why does gravity work? Why is the sky blue? Why do things fall? Never stop asking why. That is where all knowledge begins." The student nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. "I will remember that," she said. "I will always ask why." Lena sat back, content. A new generation of questions had begun. And it would continue forever, passed from teacher to student, from generation to generation. Somewhere in the galaxy, in a classroom on a distant world, a human child raised her hand. "Teacher," she asked, "why is the sky blue?" The teacher smiled. "That is a good question. Let me tell you a story." And the universe trembled with possibility.